you and I both strongly believe in the power of art and creativity and design to change things. That's why we do what we do. And that's very much the thread when we're programming Bend Design, is to bring in those people who are using their creativity to make a difference. It's not just about designing the next cool thing. If that cool thing happens to be pushing change, okay. But it's not just coolness for the sake of coolness.
Architect Michael Lear has said that communities are often self-fulfilling prophecies, that the stories we tell about our spaces and places become them. If that's true, then the stories around Bend, Oregon have been good. And a large portion of that is due to Renee Mitchell and Martha Murray of Scale House. Responsible for the Bend Design Conference and many other endeavors in and around Bend, they have helped tell a great story about Bend and what it's becoming. Focused on cultivating the arts and inspiring creative problem solving through good design, this dynamic duo has delivered high-impact experiences and cultivated a community along the way. In this episode of the Roadcast, we sit down with Martha and Renee to hear about the origin story of Scale House and hear from some of the presenters from last year's Bend Design to get a taste of the inspiration you can come to expect. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Roadcast, and we'll see you down the road or at Bend Design. Cheers. Martha, Renee, thanks for being on Roadcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we are here. We get the sweet view.
I know.
I don't know if the viewer doesn't get the good view. We are looking at Mirror Pond, not the beer, the actual one. Here at Drake Park.
The body of water.
Yes, the body of water. And we're so excited that we get catch a little time with you. Both of you creative and designers in your own right, but then also really integral to the design and creative scene here in Bend. And so my connection to the two of you was I attended a conference called Bend Design. Partly inspiration from Bend Design is what launched Roadcast and other endeavors. It's an amazing conference that brings in world-class creatives from all sorts of disciplines and offers just amazing inspiration. But I know that that's a part of a family or a part of an ecosystem of different offerings and experiences that belong to Scale House. So is it right to say, when did Scale House begin, or when did the two of you meet? What's the right question to kind of like begin the storyline?
The origin.
Yeah, the origin story.
Well, Paul Evers, who you chatted with from Riff. He and I are business partners, and we had a vision, like in 1997, to create an art center where people could come in and...
Oh, and you're at an agency together.
Yes,
TBD.
We're an agency together. And so we were exploring the idea of what would an art center look like, where we could have classes and workshops and studio space. And, you know, Paul's an artist, and I just love to be around artists. So it was, could we make this happen?
Yeah.
We decided that we probably should focus on the paying clients. So... right around that time, a mutual friend of ours, Pat Clark, had a printmaking studio in town called Atelier 6000. And it was her dream to open a contemporary art center along with two other individuals, Sandy and Alex Anderson. So they came to meet with Paul and me, and we said, let's do it. So working with Pat, we wrote business plan, the 501c3 application, which is not an easy task, I will tell you.
People hire just to do that for people.
Right. So we started off on this endeavor, and we had really big eyes, small pocketbook, big eyes, to open a contemporary creative art center where we would house Pat's organization, the printmaking studio. We would have gallery space, workshop space, and we quickly learned that while it was a good idea and a really different offering of other arts organizations and entities in Bend, we had to prove ourselves. So we started with some programming, and one of the very first programs we came up with was a design conference, which was
Okay.
really inspired by Design Week Portland.
Yeah.
We were driving around in Portland and said, oh, wouldn't that be cool if we had a design conference? And Pat quickly sent Martha my way. And she was exactly what we needed to propel the vision, really working
Martha.
on
Why?
operations. She can organize and do
The
anything.
planning in the organization.
So, we had the vision, we had contacted all the speakers, we had a program in place, and now it was, okay, we're going to have 300 people walk into the Tower Theater,
What next?
and we need to have them all have a place to do a workshop. And Martha said,
What year was this?
I got 2015?
I think, yes.
2015 was our
Yeah.
first year.
Yeah.
So
Mind you, we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
None.
I love that. That's
None.
the best.
So, yeah.
we knew what we wanted to do, and we pulled it off.
We did.
How was that first year?
It was nerve-wracking, but truly amazing that it actually came together and we pulled it off.
Yeah.
And went, wow. And the reception was amazing.
Right.
I mean, from the people that attended, we were like, we've been so hungry for this. We need this.
Yeah.
Well, the first year, we had 300 people,
The first year, right off that's a really solid number.
which was amazing. The second year, we were more than that, I don't remember. But by the third year, we were selling out.
Well,
Yeah.
we've heard what attendees like is because of the programming and some of the events we have around the conference, that attendees have access to speakers. It's not one of those events where you see someone on stage and after they talk, they leave and then they're back in the green room and you never see
Yeah.
them again. So attendees have the opportunity to ask them questions, talk to them after their
Yeah.
presentation, and then we have dinners and parties and gatherings where they can engage.
Yeah.
And then these relationships have formed. We see on social media, I'm in awe
Yeah.
of how many people have connected and are continuing to do projects.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I mean, I've
Yeah.
gone to the conference and had dinners with the speakers,
Right.
just random. And part of it's like you got to kind of have a little bit of gumption, be like, hey, you want to go grab a drink, grab some food? But
Yeah.
there is an intimacy to it that I think is special too. That you're not getting lost, and
Right.
it's a good size, it still has good energy, but yeah, you get to interact and hang. Okay, we're here at Ben Design.
Yeah.
Michael Lear, thanks
Yeah.
for joining us here. We're doing a little kind of follow-up from the talk. And
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It was
Had a
pleasure.
couple questions. I think, listening to your talk, which was really amazing, one of the things that came to mind initially for me is the word that kept coming up to mind is perspective.
Uh-huh.
And kind of the perspective even on cities and the age of cities. Being an Angelino,
Yeah.
someone who's lived your whole life in Los Angeles, and this kind of short-term and long-term perspective we have about our cities and the health of them and the way they're being built. And I wonder if you could just speak to kind of your view of Los Angeles as it relates to time and its age. And
Yeah, that's actually that's a great question. And first of all, I mean, cities are living organisms, and neighborhoods are living organisms. So they grow and shrink. They have good times and bad times. And one of the notions I had near the end of my talk was that good news, well, frankly, all news matters in a city because communities are self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think your neighborhood is good and your city is good, you treat it such and it becomes better.
Yeah.
And if you think your city or neighborhood is declining, you treat it such and it declines and becomes worse. And one of the
was there a moment when that like crystallized for you, like a story, or like when you had this realization as an architect or a city planner?
Well, probably more as someone who has basically lived in the same neighborhood my whole life. I've lived, only 12 of my 68 years outside of the neighborhood of Los Feliz and Silver Lake in Los Angeles. And probably the biggest insight And also, if you're in my line of work and you think the way I do, you pay attention to when things are degrading or coming back to life. And I remember, for instance, the main shopping street in my neighborhood. As a child, I would go with my mother, and you'd go up and down the street, and you'd walk into the markets and the stores and the gas stations, and everybody would know your name, and it was thriving and wholesome. And then, it slowed down a little bit, and then they took out about a third of the street, and they put a post office there, and the street was dead for the next 30 years. And it's largely come back to life, 30, 40 years later. But that's very real and very vivid. And certainly as an architect, when you, in downtown LA, we worked about 15 years ago on a city block.
Yeah.
And these are old buildings, which probably for 40 or 50 years, everybody looked through as if they had no value. I mean, these are like 10, 15-story industrial buildings, but kind of run down, and you'd look through them as if they didn't exist. So there was our project and another one which did work to their buildings.
Yeah.
So they looked fresh and refreshed. And those few buildings out of the hundreds of buildings that are there, when you looked at them refreshed, all of a sudden it changed the narrative and value of every other building. The story of, you looked at those buildings and you say, oh, all of these other buildings are really beautiful too. And that's the way it works. It's a deeply the way we think and perceive and value and engage ourselves in cities is deeply psychological. It's somebody tells you, like a building, that on the street you live, that building was a historically important building, and you just found out about it now, even though you've lived there for 20 years. You say, oh my God, you're right, it's really beautiful. Yeah. It doesn't look any different. You look at it differently, and you perceive it differently.
I think that that we're so story formed that we stories shape the way we view things, and I thought that was such an interesting note to strike, to say when shaping a city, pay attention to the story you're telling about it.
Big time.
And I guess I want to tease that out a little more about the larger vision of supporting the arts and the artists in Bend, and why that kind of thread of you didn't let it go. It's yes, Bend Design is a great piece of programming. It's amazing. It's got energy, but there's something else that's even above and over and around it that's saying, hey, we kind of want a bigger piece of the pie. And what it's hard to articulate, because it's vision, but I'd love to have you play with it, riff on it.
The vision is how can we look at creativity, design, and art as a platform to talk about issues that are really impacting individuals, impacting our community, impacting the greater world. And Bend Design really launched that thinking, and now what we're seeing with Scale House is we're having exhibitions where artists are talking about situations and issues, and a lot of our programming is focused around that.
Yeah, so it's engaging in these larger conversations, and it's the entry point for a lot of people. A piece of art, a piece of music, whatever it is, it's hey, this is the conversation we need to be having. And that's always the sense I've got going to Bend Design is this is a design conference, but it also is aimed at change. It always has a real steady thread throughout it.
It's very much about using, and I think this is part of the overarching vision for Scale House. It's you and I both strongly believe in the power of art and creativity and design to change things. That's why we do what we do. And that's very much the thread when we're programming Bend Design, is to bring in those people who are using their creativity to make a difference. It's not just about designing the next cool thing. If that cool thing happens to be pushing change, okay. But it's not just coolness for the sake of coolness.
The comment that you made during the speech was very interesting about Adobe, where you have to pay monthly for access to your tools.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's hard. That's a bitter pill for an immigrant to swallow. I was raised in the way that said, own your tools.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's a human right, to be honest.
When I was on the airplane and I'd releasing an album and I didn't make the album art, and I opened up Adobe Photoshop out of sheer hatred, because I use Figma for everything now,
Right.
and now it's Adobe anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, I opened this up, and then it was like, sorry, we can't connect to the cloud. And so I couldn't use my tools.
Right.
And that's like saying that you have to have that's like, in a way, kind of libertarian, that you need to have a subscription for your hammer in your own home, that you can't just buy them outright.
Right.
I mean, it used to be $1,000 and like, okay, yes. In the
Sure.
past, the statute of limitations is up for this, but I pirated everything. How do you think that these people got their new crop of users? And I say crop by actually saying crop here, is that
Right.
they farm people, but like there's a lot of people pirating stuff and hacking stuff that became like very core customers later on of these systems because they were allowed to play with them. And so it's just kind of a nightmare scenario where like I'm wondering what happens post-subscription and if there's going to be a post-subscription, or are we just locked in this like really bad 24-hour fitness gym model for the rest of our lives?
I'm hoping that we get the chance to buy it back. And I'm hoping that that's just the piece of decency that Adobe shows, is that you can buy it for, in this version, frozen, $1,000, and we'll all be done, versus the idea of perpetually paying $75 a month.
And that's an interesting, I'd love for you guys to talk more about that, of the design of the programming. Like, hey, we want people that are creating for change or designing for change.
Yeah.
Was that always in place? What's the process? Because I really feel like what you curate is an amazing group of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'd love to kind of like pop the hood on that. Or
We've been really lucky, I'll be honest, just from the beginning. We've been really lucky. But yeah, I think it is. I mean, I'm always pushing against, I don't want a theme per se, but it is still this using your talent to change, to do something, whether it's in your community, whether it's larger, whatever, but it is to make to shape something, to shape your future, shape your community, shape the world, if we want to get really lofty.
Yeah. No, I think it is. I mean, ultimately, that's what design is you're shaping the
and if you
lived
look
experience.
so that's kind of been that's been our guiding principle in terms of programming. So then it's finding people who fit in there.
Into that.
Well, the first year, this was a learning.
Yeah.
We did have our interior designer. We had our UX designer. We had our architect, and it felt very choppy.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a theme, but looking at, let's bring in different disciplines, but make sure that they are speaking about interesting projects and how they see design impacting their communities. So that was a really good shift for us.
I did a workshop, which is a workshop I've been doing since the 90s, called How to Make Mistakes on Purpose.
Since the 90s?
Yes. And I've taught this all over the world for Google and Starbucks and, American Greetings and Eden Speakerman in Berlin and all over. And it's really about, I call it mistakes on purpose because I like the way it sounds. But what it really is a way to bring in the random, because in my view, in our digital world, everything is too perfect and people are very good at their jobs and they repeat the same things over and over. And in order to find something new and discover new things and be surprised, you need to sabotage all that with a bit of chaos. So I'm not against problem solving. That's what we do 364 days a year.
It's
but
like
for
we've
one
almost
day,
just got too good at it.
Indeed. For one day, we can just make stuff. I always say quantity, not quality. So basically what we do is we make a whole lot of stuff and then we go, oh, what could this be after we do it.
Yeah.
So rather than, I always talk about the guy that invented Velcro. He went for a walk and he got burrs stuck on his pants. You probably know this already, right?
No.
But a lot of people have heard the story. But he got burrs stuck on his pants and he was like, oh, what could this be? And then he invented Velcro because they stuck together. But he didn't sit in a white laboratory where everything was perfect and, what this world needs is a new way to stick things together, and I'm going to be creative now and invent that. No.
Yeah.
It just something happened, something random in chaos, and then he said, oh, what could this be? But, the same thing with penicillin. The guy, Fleming, left some dirty dishes in the sink, and there was some mold that resisted some other mold. And he said, oh, what could this be? And then it saved billions of lives. But our world now, especially if you think about like big pharma, there was a guy at this conference that was talking about it that he's a chemist, and he agreed that they refine and refine and refine and focus on, tiny little, experiments with drugs. But obviously, if they discovered a cure for cancer or AIDS or COVID, we'd all know by now, right? But penicillin was that big. But I think you need that kind of a jolt, that kind of chaotic thing. And in our digital world, and so sophisticated and good,
it's almost like we feel like
problem solving, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's like people don't think there's anything left to explore.
Indeed,
Like
but there is.
There is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing that I've noticed in attending and even talking to you both is, design thinking can be really broad. You can have these really broad categories, but it feels like it is about design and creativity and using these two concepts or ideas to carve out space for conversation. Which felt like in the middle of the pandemic, like you said, like we need to talk about something other than disaster, focus our heads, or even in the midst of like, hey, let these topics be a pathway of conversation to something refreshing, which there's so much energy being pulled in terms of like the attention economy, like pulling our attention to our phones or whatever it is. So it just feels so important as ever to like craft space where the conversations can happen and using, and maybe it's like using design, but letting design and creativity and art like lead the way, so that there's something to talk about that is different.
Yeah, and it's been so easy to become isolated that having a reason to come out and join together with others is really healthy and healing and spurs your creativity and all of that.
Absolutely. Do you have hopes? I mean, I'm sure you do, but I'm curious, like 1 or 2 hopes for the next 5 years, looking at Scale House and Bend even as a city, that you'd love to see happen, or things that you, I don't know, that you'd hope for.
We're working with the city of Bend right now on a project of using creativity in art and design to look at houselessness in our community. And we are hoping to partner with an organization called Four Freedoms. And they are a platform for an artist-driven platform looking at social issues. And they do paint the sides of vehicles, billboards, murals. It was started by Hank Willis Thomas. And
they present last year?
They did.
Yeah, they did.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Yes, the billboards.
So we are looking at partnering with them to do something similar in the city of Bend. Which is really great that our city comes to us and asks us to do this, and then how do we make that happen? So organizations in our community are seeing the value of art as a medium to have dialogue. It feels like it's a safe place to have a dialogue where parties might not necessarily agree. So we're really thrilled that the city sees that and wants to partner with us.
Love it. That's great. Great idea. Great vision for the future. Love it.
So that's the interesting part. People coming to us the past few years of, let's talk to Scale House about that. They'll have some ideas. We can partner with them on that. And that's a really great place to be.
And I think it's a great, I don't know, I hope people are inspired by that, like similar to us and others, of just gathering creatives and having them be a part of the conversation, central to the conversation, about how to, a lot of times they're leading the way and how to have the conversations creatively and shape the city in fun, interesting ways.
I think it's true. I mean, creative people think in a way that is not the same as everybody else.
Yes.
And not to make that
you need both,
biggest
but
separation, but It's just we have great problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
So let's use that.
Let's go. Lean into it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was
been,
fun.
Yeah,
So
I love the
fun.
story and
Sitting out here looking at the river.
I know it's
But the people going by was cracking me up.
stopping and asking.
Yeah, all
and
the
checking
dogs,
stuff
the
out.
bikes,
Well, and
everybody
also,
that's
like-
walking by.
We're not that important.
The two
Yeah.
big stars,
Yeah.
central to
Yeah.
Bend, right
Yeah,
here,
they're all
ladies and
looking at me
gentlemen.
like, who are
Who
they?
are
Why
they?
are they
Oh,
there?
come on.
Oh my
You're the best.
god.